All right, great. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the networking break. And we'll continue now our discussions on legislation and fuel economy, pollutant emissions, real-world driving. And we'll continue with a panel discussion now with Penny from the European Commission. We've got Nick Molden, CEO of and founder Emission Analytics, and Jens Borken-Kliefeld, Senior Research Scholar from the International Institute for Applied System Analysis. So I can see three of you here, so welcome to the stage. Please join me.
Oh, that's true.
Good. So what I would do, let's just like start the conversation with a few discussion with a few direct questions to you, and then I can open for questions. And so feel free to raise your hand and bring your questions in. But I would just start like by discussing the topic of this panel. We're calling it a trade-off. Where's the trade-off between fuel economy, pollutant emissions, costs, and performance? So quite a lot involved. And of course, we would have, if we had 5 hours, I'm sure there would be enough discussion for 5 hours. But we have half an hour, so let's do our best. So there's a trade-off. We're talking, like just now, there is a direct focus on pollutant emissions, mainly with real-world driving considerations, starting September this year for all new registrations. But there's still, manufacturers are also getting prepared for CO2 targets for the stricter CO2 targets in 2021. Do we all understand that it is possible to achieve lower NOx particulate emission reduction now and the right CO2 targets in a few years' time, or are there still challenges to be discussed? Penny, your thoughts? You're smiling.
Thank you. It's a very good question, but I'm sure this question would be better replied by the manufacturers themselves. Mm-hmm. It is true that we have heard a lot about the penalty you pay for actually abating emissions, but now we start seeing results that do not show this penalty anymore. But I really strongly believe that the after-treatment system is not where the manufacturers should focus. It should be to improve their vehicles, improve the combustion process. It has also to do a lot with substituting the fleet with lighter vehicles, with vehicles that are more electrified, with vehicles that have alternative powertrains and so on. So while there is a slight link there, I think that having correct emission standards does not necessarily mean that you cannot achieve CO2.
Great. Jens, you focus on both air quality and greenhouse gas as well. So how do you see this trade-off, and do you think focus has been where it should be, or are there things that need to be changed in order to meet both NOx and CO2 reduction targets?
I mean, the target is not set how it is to be achieved, but it is set because it is necessary. The targets are set because it is necessary, because there are problems with air quality and climate change, and in order to address them, there need to be mitigation on both sides. That it is feasible is for manufacturers, I think, to demonstrate. If you look, but it's not difficult. If you look to Japan, you have low emissions in CO2 and air pollutants. You can do it.
Okay. And Nick, of course, you are showing, you have a presentation afterwards where you are going to show some data as well. But Can you just give us an indication on are things taking the right direction? Current cars going showing improvements?
Before I answer that, if I could just make a more macro point.
Sure.
I think this is when you cut through all the complexity of it. This is a classic externalities problem, and it's a classic problem of complete or incomplete information. And to come to a satisfactory solution, it's important to have as complete information as possible, to try and internalise the externalities to the relevant players, and then in a way you can bring about whatever policy outcome you want. I think what we've been grappling with over the last few years is a malfunctioning regulatory system, which is now being very aggressively addressed, such that the market doesn't work. So those externalities are not being internalised, and therefore policy is acting in an ineffective way, or in some cases to actually a positively detrimental outcome. And we're on the path now to sorting that out. And I mean that for me goes to the heart of the problem, because ultimately it's for the market and the manufacturers and consumers then to trade. They're the people buying and selling vehicles. It's the regulatory environment and the economic environment which needs to be set. And where previously it's been poorly structured, that's quite a lot of the reason why we have got the air quality problems we have today. So that's why I wanted to answer that. It's those second order issues that have to be addressed, and I think are very much on the route to being addressed. Then the question is how you deal with the overhang of that. So the big installed base of over-emitting vehicles. What do you do about that in the most economic way and in the most socially fair way?
Mm-hmm. Good. Are there any questions? Anyone wants to bring any questions or discussions? Yes, there's one here. Just try to speak up loud, please. And state your name and company, please. Just so.
I think that's a focus for car industry, to focus on more efficient cars for single persons. Volkswagen had some prototypes some time ago, but stopped the whole project.
Would you buy 3 cars for depending on different purposes?
In my personal situation, I have a normal family car, but for going to work, I have a small car, a Volkswagen Bug, which was the smallest car I could find, but it's still designed for 4 people.
Yeah, any thoughts?
Well, you could take public transport. No, you're absolutely right, and this problem is not only a problem of personal transportation, but it's also a problem for goods. We know that even the goods are being transported in half-empty trucks, and this is a problem for my colleagues in DG Move that they're trying to address it. It's a bit hard to regulate on these issues, of course, but this is a matter that should be left very much to the individual member states, I think. They can implement things like, I don't know, preferential parking or preferential lanes for those who have the vehicle full, even to do car sharing and various options. But of course, it would be important if the automotive industry also supplies not just huge SUVs, but also smaller vehicles that can bridge the gap with the CO2 targets. I agree.
So,
yes. In a way, I would turn the question around and pose it back to you in the sense that there's quite a lot of choice of vehicles of all shapes and sizes already on the market. Why aren't people buying it? And I think I'm just looking at the economic motivations, and also for a lot of buyers, what proportion of income is a car purchase, and actually because it's certain classes of car are a luxury good, and people buy it for all sorts of reasons which are not directly economic reasons. And actually, as a proportion of income, cars have become cheaper and cheaper. So people are going to be able to afford more cars.
But actually, there are no cars on the market in Europe that are really designed for one people. That's just one size seat wide car. In the US, the company Elio, they are building for next year a car designed for one people, and it consumes just 2 liters per 100 kilometers.
But why hasn't the Renault Twizy taken off massively then?
Now, that one is not suitable for the highway. It's not comparable with a normal car. It's just for city use.
That was a decision of Twizy, I think, because you could have easily transformed it to Renault, sorry, not Twizy. You could have easily transformed it to a proper vehicle, but it was decided to take an L category type approval, not a passenger car type approval, and that was the end product. But yes, okay, this is a valid point for the automotive industry. I'm sure they're looking into solutions like that, because I'm pretty sure that they will try to comply with the targets for CO2, and this is an easy way to do it. The other, of course, is electrification.
Mm-hmm. Still in this area, the question I'd like to bring is, we also have cost and performance in the discussion. You mentioned the targets are there not only to encourage the use of after treatment in conventional cars, but also to replace the fleet by smaller electrified cars. When you there have been electric models available now for a few years in the market. When you see sales of electric cars over the past few years, you can see some increase, but it is still very low, and you're not seeing a strong fleet replacement. Do you think that's because there are still issues and reservations from customers to buy electric cars, or do you think it's something that will end up coming when the targets are effectively in place? How do you see the development of these alternative technologies, and why we're still seeing majority of conventional engine cars being sold?
Expect me to answer? Okay.
No, your view, of course.
Sure, I can give you my view, of course. Very good question. I mean, a couple of years ago, we had to buy a new vehicle in my family, and my husband said, let's buy an electric vehicle. I said, honey, okay, but where are we going to charge it? And I think this is the major problem of many people that do not end up not buying a battery electric vehicle that would fit otherwise their use needs, but the infrastructure is simply not there. Okay, in our case it was not there because it was a public parking space where we were parking, and there was no plug, and at work the same problem. This is one category of people, and then there is another category of people who will want to use the car for longer ranges, and of course they always have the range anxiety. Is this vehicle going to take me where I need to? So it's a duplex problem. I think that obviously countries like Norway, who had huge incentives, or the Netherlands, who also had huge incentives, saw the percentage of electric vehicles in their car grow quite a bit. But the final part is with the automotive industry, that they will need to produce slowly and come down with a price, so they are comparable in price and not any more higher commodity issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In terms of
Jen.
CO2 reduction, I don't share the hype about electric vehicles. I think you can gain important reductions in CO2 emissions from improvement of the conventional powertrain, from increasing the electrical efficiency, from downsizing, from smoothing the driving conditions. And this does, and investing there is more cost effective in terms of avoided CO2 than investing currently into expensive electric vehicle technologies. It may be the case that it is needed to make this upfront investment now to get later the gains, but it's a trade-off. And so far I wouldn't therefore bet all things on electric vehicles or electrification, but would strongly argue that anything that goes currently into the efficiency improvement will later on also benefit. Lighter vehicles, lightweight materials, stuff like this will also help electric vehicles to have smaller batteries, become more competitive and have lower consumption.
Okay, great. Yeah, Nick?
I mean, I would tend to agree with a lot of that. I mean, but firstly, I would say, I really, promoting any particular type of technology is very much, in my view, not the role of regulation at all. And to try and shoehorn in policy through regulation, I think is not the role of regulation. And also, I think, when trying to develop policy that tries to promote one technology or over another is fraught with difficulty. And to summarise what's going on in the UK at the moment, I mean, there's sort of general agreement that EVs are to be pushed and the internal combustion engine is to be stopped by 2040, 2030, depending on who you talk to. But essentially, it's just it's coming, ending up as a scrap, a definitional argument as to what an electric vehicle is. And so it becomes, which is just a pointless discussion. The market should be structured in such a way where there's technology-neutral regulation, which then lets all sorts of creative combinations of electricity and petrol, diesel, whatever it is, fight out in the marketplace, subject to legal regulation, rather than some either regulators or politicians with an asymmetry of information. The manufacturers know a lot more about what's in their car than the regulators do. So to try and set policy like that with asymmetrical information is a road to disaster. So I wouldn't even try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Can I say something on this, maybe on
Sure.
the comment of Nick? Nick, you're partly right. I mean, I think the role of a regulator, and I'm not speaking as a European Commission regulator, but maybe the member states, is actually to overcome this barrier for entry into the market. If there are enough people who have bought a good technology, whatever that is, it will convince the others to actually, maybe it's worth looking into them. So, as you know, the regulation do not have any strong measures about whether electrical vehicles should be in the market by X%, at least not in Europe. There are some incentives for the zero-emission vehicles in general, including fuel cells, and we will see what the future brings. But I think the market is the best regulator in the end.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I mean, there are issues of any technology getting going, and one of them is actually establishing a healthy second-hand market. So actually, you can have a fairly good confidence in what your car, when you sell it, is going to be worth. Without that, actually, it makes them effectively a lot more expensive new. So there are, so it's not as simplistic as I would say, but I think it's important to stick with some basic principles as the role of the regulator and the role of policy, and what is just even logically possible through policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another... Yeah.
Can I just add one little thing?
Sure, of course.
From our side, as being, those who regulate the type approval of vehicles, what I would like to see in the future, and this is in preparation for the discussion for Euro 7, is actually that we have, for instance, with the range, I said we have range anxiety. And sometimes this is even made worse by declarations that are much higher than what you really get in real life. So I strongly believe that the electric vehicles of the future should give a range that's feasible under some mean conditions, but not that would be 200 times more than what you actually get in real life, or that it gets quickly down. But this range is for the whole vehicle life, and whether this will be by replacing the battery or other measures, this is up to the manufacturers to decide, I think.
Mm-hmm. Sure. What I want to ask you as well is, we've been seeing over the past few years diesel market share in for passenger cars declining year on year. We don't need to discuss why this has been the case. But how to what extent do you think, one, are the requirements now from September 18 for all new registrations and then bringing diesel emissions on streets as they should be on paper, and then in a few years' time, CO2 targets that would show the difference, the difference between a diesel car and a petrol car. To which extent these upcoming regulatory changes could impact the current diesel market share, and do you think that there's a chance diesel acceptance could change, or do you think the demonization has been so strong that things are likely to keep falling? And your thoughts? Maybe Nick?
I mean, diesel demonization is obviously it goes very, very deep. Now, that's undoubtedly true. And the problem is, without you'll see in my presentation shortly, the issue is not that clean diesels don't exist. They do, but they exist in a market which has been completely confused by a bunch of very high emitting diesel vehicles. How do you resolve that is the question. And I think without some resolution to that, and resolution for existing owners of diesel vehicles, it's going to be very hard to re-establish diesel as a generally accepted technology. Whether it'll be possible to reinvent it in some hybridized format and badge it as something with a slightly different name that most consumers don't quite clock, possibly. But I think, the hill is quite steep, despite the genuine benefits of some diesel vehicles in the market.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it is demonization. It is bringing to the public surface what is actually happening. Mm-hmm. It is one-sided in the sense that one pollutant is now very much in the focus, while there are other pollutants which are well controlled, and there have been successes about this. So this can be a rebalance. It's a bit imbalance in terms of maybe costs. While I would agree that those who produce the problems should also bear costs, it's maybe more cost-effective to invest this somewhere else than in hardware removals. So if you want to look at the air quality improvements, they can get there. But it has to be said, a clean diesel is necessary in order to allow a high share of diesels. It is not something that is accidental or that is a nice offer. No, it is a necessity to make and to continue the business case. Otherwise, I would see good arguments why it should go down. One thing that I think is under the radar so far is the issue of light commercial vehicles that are mostly diesel powered and have extremely high emissions, including strategies to circumvent type-approval regulations. And I think they have not received the attention that they deserve currently.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and Penny, as a regulator and in contact with stakeholders, how do you see upcoming regulations impacting diesel share?
I think it's clear to everybody who works in this sector that actually complying with RDE regulations will require after-treatment systems that are significantly more costly and more complex and bigger than the previous version. This means that I think what will happen is smaller diesel vehicles will disappear from the market. This is what also the automotive industry is foreseeing, I believe. And diesel will be kept for those applications where you have bigger cars, where you have cars that transport like commercial vehicles and so on. So from our side, you're right, maybe we haven't searched too much about defeat devices for light commercial vehicles, but the regulations are there. We will have soon market surveillance, so I believe if anything goes wrong, it will be discovered. So.
Yeah. Any questions or comments? We are getting to the end of the session, so if you have anything you'd like to bring to the discussion. Okay, well?
Maybe one comment about the, let's say, comments on regulators and so on. You would be right if there were really technology neutrality. I mean, everybody's talking about technology neutrality when we talk about electric vehicles. But what about the fact that we had no particle limits for GDIs up to recently, none inside for PFIs and other engines. You have differences in NOx between one and the other. So when we look at the future, for instance, we see a huge increase. I will show some results in the afternoon of particles emission from PFIs. And for instance, this clearing out of the diesel might mean that people buy GDIs and PFIs, and we start having a particle problem, for instance. So the balance is easy to change when you have an incumbent, and the new technology, if you say there's no, let's say, support, basically the incumbent always wins. Because you reduce cost by adding numbers, and if you don't start and you don't have the help to get the numbers, you never have any new technology there. So all this, I think, needs to be taken into account when we look at the future perspective. And the risk, as I say, for particles is very big because we have a lot of things coming which seem to be replacing a NOx problem with a particle problem in the long term. That maybe is not visible because these particles are so small that in their quality system as we have now, which is weight-based, they basically don't register.
I think I should reply this one. Okay. Point well taken. You know very well that the previous set of regulations were set with an attitude, okay, whatever is not a problem, we don't regulate it. We saw that this doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And I'm very upset to say that. I mean, we saw the problem of cold start against hot start, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw engines in hot start producing more emissions than engines that were cold. Okay, from an engineering point of view, it doesn't make sense. So, we closed this gap very quickly with the RDE3, and it's now there, so it will be checked. But some of the other things, will be corrected, let's put it this way, in the new regulations, whether they're called Euro 7 or whatever. This is the issues we need to address. If I am allowed to make a prediction, I predict that the new regulations will be completely technology neutral. We'll have a single standard for everything with a single introduction date and so on. But time will tell.
Great. Yeah, and then one comment over there.
A lot of the developments we have is the power installed of the car for up since 40 years. I have an old car, you will see later in the afternoon, had 18 horsepower. A Porsche in 63 horsepower. It was highly powerful. Today, even for a small vehicle, it's unacceptable. So the average power installed 2 years ago in Germany was 136 for new vehicles. And the problem is, we have speed limits not accepted, not fulfilled, people go faster, and this is one of the problems we have higher emissions. Why not? We tried, as you know, some years ago, to establish automatic speed control. If the car actually needs not more than 50, even though on a rural area, not less than 100. Why we have still not achieved this? Why is this very much on the thing? All the efforts not of the pollution and CO2, but also for accidents. Why we don't do it?
Okay.
I think you have to ask member states. This is not a matter for the European Commission to regulate, unfortunately.
There's actually quite a lot of that going on. The UK is rolling out something called smart motorways, which is long stretches which are average speed controlled and which It was originally primarily to control traffic flow from a congestion point of view, but actually they're now using it for a NOx control point of view, and having large amounts of traffic at steady state, 50 miles an hour, so what's that, 80 something kilometres an hour, actually has a dramatic impact on the NOx emissions. So, I'd say that as an observation. I make no comment personally on whether I think that's a good thing to do as a citizen, but certainly as a fact, it can have a big effect.
Okay, good. We've completed our panel discussion time, so thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.